The gun was halfway out of his coat before Caleb recognized what he was seeing. The woman stepping off that riverboat looked nothing like the photograph. Nothing. Wrong face, wrong eyes, wrong everything. And the way she clutched that leather case told him she knew it too. 3 days he'd waited in this godforsaken cold. 3 days of watching families reunite while he stood alone on frozen wood, waiting for a woman who'd promised to come. And this stranger had the nerve to walk straight toward him like she belonged here. "You're not her," Caleb said, hand still on his weapon. She didn't flinch. "No, I'm not. That woman's dead. But I'm here, and we need to talk before someone else dies." Before we dive into this story, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end. Leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Caleb's hand had already moved toward the gun under his coat before he caught himself. The woman didn't flinch, didn't step back, just stood there on the dock with snowflakes catching in her dark hair, watching him with eyes that had seen worse than a suspicious cowboy. "My name is Adeline Rousseau," she said. "The woman in the photograph was my cousin Marie. She died 6 weeks ago. Typhoid." "And you thought you'd just take her place?" Caleb's voice came out harder than he meant. "Show up and pretend to be someone else?" "I thought I'd honor a contract she made before she died." Adeline shifted the case to her other hand. Her fingers were white with cold. "Marie told me about your letters, about your ranch, about needing partnership, not pity. Those were your words." Caleb felt heat rise in his face despite the cold. Those words were meant for her. "She's dead," Adeline's voice stayed steady. "I'm here, and unless you plan to send me back on this boat tonight, we need to talk." Behind them, the riverboat crew was already preparing to depart. Other passengers had scattered into waiting arms, warm carriages, familiar faces. The dock was emptying fast. Caleb looked at this stranger who'd traveled however many miles to take a dead woman's place. Part of him wanted to put her right back on that boat. Part of him knew he couldn't afford to. "You know anything about ranching?" he asked. "No." "Cooking? Sewing? Any of the things a ranch wife needs to know?" "I can learn." She paused. "Can you teach?" The question caught him off guard. Most women would have lied, claimed skills they didn't have just to secure the arrangement. This one looked him dead in the eye and admitted she had nothing to offer except willingness. "Why'd you really come?" Caleb asked. "And don't tell me it was to honor your cousin. Nobody travels into Montana winter for sentiment." Adeline's jaw tightened. For the first time, he saw something flicker behind that steady gaze. Fear, maybe, or something worse. "I needed to disappear," she said simply. "From what?" "From men who don't like women who ask questions they shouldn't." Caleb studied her face. The riverboat whistle blew. Final warning. In 60 seconds, it would pull away from the dock, and he'd have to make a choice he wasn't ready for. "I've got a wagon waiting," he said finally. "We'll talk on the way to town." Relief washed over Adeline's features so quickly, he almost missed it. She nodded once, sharp and businesslike, then followed him toward the end of the dock. The wagon sat in shadow, 2 horses stamping impatiently against the cold. Caleb loaded her single case into the back, surprisingly light for someone planning to start a new life, then helped her up onto the bench. His hand touched hers for just a second during the climb. Her skin was ice. "How long were you standing on that boat?" he asked, taking the reins. "Since New Orleans." "That's 3 weeks upriver." "Yes." Caleb snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward. The town of Dry Creek sat 5 miles inland, and the road was already treacherous with ice. They rode in silence for the first mile, nothing but the creak of the wagon and the wind cutting through the canyon walls. Finally, Adeline spoke. "Your letters mentioned a brother." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "He died 4 months ago." "I'm sorry." "Range dispute with a neighboring rancher. Silas Crowley runs cattle on the land north of mine. My brother Thomas caught his men cutting our fence line. There was an argument. Things got out of hand." "Did they arrest anyone?" "Crowley's men claimed self-defense. Said Thomas drew first." Caleb's voice went flat. "No witnesses except the men who killed him." Adeline was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, sharper, like she was working through a problem. "And after your brother died, the advertisement went out." "I needed help running the ranch. Thomas handled the books, the supply orders, the negotiations with buyers. I'm good with cattle and horses, not so good with paperwork and people." "So you needed a partner." "That's what I said in the letters." "Most men would have hired a foreman." Caleb shot her a sideways glance. "Most men don't have half the county thinking they're about to lose everything." "Are you?" The question was blunt, direct. Nothing like the polite dancing around that usually came with courtship, even the mail-order kind. "Maybe," Caleb admitted. "Lost 60 head in the winter die-off. Crowley's been circling like a vulture ever since, waiting for me to fold so he can buy the land cheap. And now, with Thomas gone," he trailed off. "You thought a wife would make you look more stable." "I thought partnership might keep me from drowning." He glanced at her again. "What about you? What questions did you ask that made you need to run?" Adeline's hands folded in her lap, fingers lacing together tight. "I worked for a shipping company in New Orleans. Clerical work mostly. Recording cargo manifests, tracking payments, simple work. Until it wasn't. Until I noticed women being listed as cargo." Her voice stayed level, but Caleb heard the anger underneath. Young women, mostly immigrants, fresh off boats from Ireland, Italy, France. They'd signed contracts for domestic work, housekeeping, nannying, legitimate jobs. But the manifests showed them being transferred to different addresses than their contracts specified. "You reported it." "I tried. Took my findings to the Port Authority first. They thanked me for my concern and told me to mind my own business. So I went to the police. They said without proof of actual wrongdoing, there was nothing they could do. The contracts were legal, even if the destinations weren't what the women expected." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "So you got proof?" "I followed one of the shipments, watched a group of 15 women get loaded into wagons that were supposed to take them to respectable households. Instead, they went to a warehouse district near the river. I saw them being separated, heard men bidding on them like livestock. Jesus. I documented everything, names, locations, payment records. Then I took it to a newspaper editor who'd published stories about corruption before. He was ready to print it." She paused. 2 days before publication, his office burned down. Everything inside destroyed. He barely got out alive. "And they knew you were the source." "My fiancé was a clerk at the shipping company too. He tried to protect me, said he'd testify that he'd discovered the irregularities, not me. Thought it would take the target off my back." Her voice cracked just slightly. "They found him in the river 3 days later." The wagon hit a rut in the road. Caleb barely noticed. "So you ran," he said quietly. "I ran. Used Marie's name to book passage. Switched to my own name once I was far enough upriver that tracking became difficult. But the man who owns that shipping company, Henri Dufresne, he has connections everywhere. Money buys long memories." "And you think he followed you all the way to Montana?" "I think Henri Dufresne doesn't forget people who cost him money and reputation. And I think Montana might be far, but it's not invisible. They crested a hill, and the lights of Dry Creek appeared in the distance. Small, scattered. Nothing like New Orleans, Caleb guessed. "That why you took Marie's place?" he asked. "Thought a marriage would give you cover?" "I thought a marriage to a man who needed partnership instead of romance might give me a chance to disappear properly. Become someone new. Mrs. Caleb Mercer instead of Adeline Rousseau." Caleb pulled the horses to a stop just outside town. He turned to face her fully. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need the truth. Can you live with more death if it comes? Because if Crowley's looking for an excuse to take my land, a scandal about my wife having a dangerous past would serve him just fine. And if this Dufresne fellow really does have long reach, then marrying me might make you safer. But it'll sure as hell make me a target." Adeline met his eyes without flinching. "I watched my fiancé die because he tried to protect me. I live with that every day. If you're asking whether I'm worth the risk, I can't answer that. But if you're asking whether I'll run at the first sign of trouble, the answer is no. I'm done running." Caleb searched her face for lies and found none. Just exhaustion, determination, and something that looked like desperation wearing a brave face. "All right then," he said. "We'll get married tomorrow. Reverend Fletcher usually needs 2 witnesses, but I reckon we can find someone willing. Then we figure out how to keep both our heads above water." "Just like that?" "Just like that. I needed a partner. You needed a new name. We're both too practical to pretend this is something it's not." Adeline nodded slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the ranch, and you haven't met the town." He snapped the reins, and they rolled into Dry Creek proper. The main street was quiet this time of night, just a few lit windows from the saloon and the boarding house. Caleb pulled up in front of a modest, 2-story building with a sign that read, "Fletcher's Inn." "You'll stay here tonight," he said, climbing down and retrieving her case. "I'll be back at first light. We'll handle the legal business, then head to the ranch." Adeline climbed down without waiting for help, stumbling slightly when her feet hit the frozen ground. Caleb caught her elbow. "You all right?" "Just cold and tired." He walked her to the door and knocked. A moment later, a woman in her 50s appeared, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mrs. Fletcher, the innkeeper." "Caleb Mercer," she said, surprise clear in her voice. "Wasn't expecting to see you tonight." "Need a room for a lady, Mrs. Fletcher. Just one night." The innkeeper's eyes shifted to Adeline, taking in the thin coat, the exhausted face, the way she held herself like someone trying very hard not to collapse. "This the mail-order bride we've been hearing about?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "Yes, ma'am. Miss Rousseau will be Mrs. Mercer by tomorrow afternoon." Mrs. Fletcher's expression was impossible to read. "I see. Well, come inside then, both of you. No sense freezing on my doorstep." They stepped into the warm front room. Adeline swayed slightly, and Caleb realized she probably hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. "She needs food," he said, "and a hot bath if you've got water." "I can manage that." Mrs. Fletcher gestured toward the stairs. "Room 3 is available. I'll bring up a tray." Caleb set Adeline's case at the foot of the stairs. When he turned back, she was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "I'll see you in the morning," he said. "Caleb." She said his name for the first time, testing the shape of it. "Why did you really wait 3 days at that dock?" He considered lying, considered saying something practical about responsibility or commitment to a contract. Instead, he told the truth. Because my brother died thinking I'd failed him, and I needed to prove, to myself, I guess, that I could still keep a promise to somebody. Adeline's throat worked like she was swallowing something painful. I'll try to be worth the promise. Just try to be honest. That's all I'm asking. He tipped his hat and left before she could respond. The ride back to his ranch took 40 minutes in the dark. The house was cold when he arrived, dark and empty, the way it had been since Thomas died. Caleb lit a single lamp and sat at the kitchen table with the letters Marie had sent over the past 6 months. He read them again, looking for clues he'd missed. The handwriting was neat, educated. The tone was hopeful, but practical. She'd asked good questions about the ranch, about Montana, about what would be expected. Nothing in these letters suggested deception or desperation. But then, the woman who'd written them was dead. And the woman who'd shown up in her place had eyes that had seen things no photograph could capture. Caleb folded the letters and put them away. Tomorrow, he'd marry a stranger. Tomorrow, he'd tie his fate to a woman running from something she might have brought right to his door. Tomorrow, he'd find out if partnership was enough to keep them both alive. He blew out the lamp and climbed the stairs to the bedroom he'd shared with no one. The bed was too big, the room too quiet. He lay awake, listening to the wind and thinking about the way Adeline had said, "I'm done running," like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, Caleb finally slept and dreamed of riverboats and frozen water and women who stepped into the unknown because staying put meant dying slow. Morning came hard and bright. Caleb was at Fletcher's Inn before the sun cleared the mountains. Mrs. Fletcher answered his knock with a knowing look. "She's in the dining room. Been up since before dawn." Caleb found Adeline sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the street. She'd changed into a simple dark dress, still worn, still too thin for Montana winter, but clean. "Morning," he said, taking the seat across from her. She looked up. The exhaustion was still there, but something else had settled into her features overnight. Resolve, maybe. "Morning. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about making me a target." Caleb's chest tightened. "Having second thoughts?" "No, having practical ones. If we're going to do this, really do this, we need to be smart about it. I can't just appear as your wife without explanation. People will ask questions." "Let them ask." "And when they ask why you married so quickly, why you brought a stranger into your home right when you're already vulnerable, Caleb, they'll think I'm taking advantage. Or worse, they'll think something's wrong and start digging." She was right. Caleb knew she was right. "What do you suggest?" Adeline leaned forward. "We tell a version of the truth. Marie died. I'm her cousin. I came to deliver the news in person and to return the letters you'd sent. You offered me a position as housekeeper. After working together for a few weeks, we decided marriage made sense. Practical, respectable, nothing scandalous." That's a lot of story to keep straight. It's better than no story at all, and it gives us time to actually learn about each other before the whole town expects us to act like a married couple. Caleb considered this. "You want to pretend to court. I want to pretend to be careful. Give people a reason to accept me that doesn't involve desperation on either of our parts." It was smart, calculated, exactly the kind of thinking he'd said he needed in a partner. "All right," he agreed, "but we still do the legal marriage today. Just quiet, with only the witnesses required. As far as the town knows, you're my housekeeper for now." Agreed. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, then walked 3 blocks to Reverend Fletcher's church, a small white building that doubled as the town's community hall. The Reverend was Mrs. Fletcher's husband, a thin man with kind eyes who asked no questions when Caleb explained they needed a private ceremony. "You'll need witnesses," Reverend Fletcher said. "I can stand," Mrs. Fletcher volunteered, appearing from the back of the church. "And I'll stand for the bride," came another voice. Caleb turned to find Doc Morrison stepping through the side door, medical bag in hand. The old doctor had delivered half the babies in Dry Creek and patched up the other half when they got stupid enough to need it. "Heard you might need an extra body," Doc said, nodding at Adeline. "Figured I'd make myself useful." The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. No music, no flowers, no family. Just words spoken over a worn Bible and 2 signatures on a certificate that made them legally bound. When Reverend Fletcher pronounced them married, Adeline's hand trembled in Caleb's. He squeezed it once. Reassurance or solidarity, he wasn't sure which. "Well then," Doc Morrison said as they filed out of the church, "I suppose congratulations are in order. Though I suspect this isn't quite the wedding day either of you imagined." "Nothing about this situation is what either of us imagined," Caleb replied honestly. Doc turned to Adeline. "Mrs. Mercer, if you ever need medical attention or just someone to talk to who isn't your husband, my door's always open." "Thank you," Adeline said quietly. After Doc and the Fletchers departed, Caleb and Adeline stood on the church steps facing the cold morning. "Ready to see the ranch?" Caleb asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." The ride out took them through open country, vast stretches of snow-covered grassland broken by occasional stands of cottonwood. Adeline stayed quiet, taking it all in. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Lonely, but beautiful." "Gets more lonely in winter. Come spring, you'll see wildflowers clear to the horizon." "If we make it to spring." Caleb glanced at her. "We'll make it." "You sound certain." "I've survived worse winters than this one." They crested a low rise, and Caleb's ranch spread out below, a cluster of buildings huddled against the wind. The main house, barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Modest by some standards, but it was his and Thomas's. Now, his and Adeline's. "Home," he said simply. Adeline studied the buildings for a long moment. "Show me everything. I need to understand what I'm working with." They spent the next 3 hours going through every structure, every supply shed, every corner of the operation. Adeline asked questions constantly about feed schedules, fence maintenance, water sources, supply chains. She took notes in a small leather journal she pulled from her case. Caleb found himself impressed. She wasn't pretending to know things she didn't, but she was learning fast, connecting pieces, seeing patterns. "Your brother handled the books?" she asked, as they stood in what had been Thomas's office. "Yes." "Can I see them?" Caleb hesitated. The books were a mess. Thomas had been good with numbers, but terrible at organization. After he died, Caleb had tried to make sense of them and failed. "They're not in great shape," he admitted. "Show me anyway." He pulled out the ledgers. Adeline spread them across the desk and started going through them page by page, her fingers tracing columns and figures. After 20 minutes of silence, she looked up. "Caleb, you're missing money." His stomach dropped. "What?" "These supply purchases don't match your inventory. You've got receipts for feed deliveries that should have lasted 3 months, but your current stores suggest you've only got enough for 6 weeks. Either someone's stealing or someone's falsifying records." Caleb moved to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder at the numbers. She was right. The discrepancies were small enough to miss if you weren't looking carefully, but once you saw them, they were obvious. "Thomas would have noticed this," he said slowly. "Maybe he did notice. Maybe that's why he was out checking fence lines the night he died." The implication hung between them like smoke. "You think Crowley wasn't just running cattle raids?" Caleb said. "You think he was? I think someone's been systematically stealing from you for months. And I think your brother figured it out." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. All this time, he thought Thomas's death was just bad luck and worse timing. But if Adeline was right, if someone had been stealing and Thomas had discovered it— "We need proof," Adeline said, her voice taking on that sharp, focused quality he'd heard before. "And we need to be very, very careful. If these men killed your brother to cover their tracks, they won't hesitate to kill again." She was right, but hearing it spoken aloud made Caleb's blood run cold. "Why are you helping me?" he asked suddenly. "You could have just kept your head down, played the quiet wife, stayed out of trouble." Adeline looked up at him, and for the first time since stepping off that riverboat, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, more tired than anything else, but it was real. "Because I'm good at finding patterns in numbers. It's what got me in trouble back in New Orleans, and it's apparently the only useful skill I brought to Montana. Might as well use it." "This could get you killed." "I was already risking that by coming here. At least this way, I'm choosing the risk instead of having it choose me." Caleb studied her face. This stranger he'd married, this woman who'd stepped into a dead cousin's identity and somehow landed in the middle of his mess. "Partnership," he said quietly. "Partnership," she agreed. And somewhere in the frozen Montana afternoon, a deal more binding than any wedding vow took shape between them. They were in this together now, for better or worse. Probably worse, but together nonetheless. The first incident happened 3 days after the wedding. Caleb was checking the north fence line when he found it. A fresh cut, clean and deliberate, wide enough for cattle to wander through. He stood there in the snow, studying the marks, and felt his jaw tighten. Someone was making a move. He rode back to the ranch faster than he should have, the horse's breath coming in white clouds. Adeline was in Thomas's old office, surrounded by ledgers and papers, her pen scratching across a fresh notebook. "They cut the fence," he said without preamble. She looked up, pen frozen mid-stroke. "Where?" "North pasture, same section where Thomas was killed." Adeline set down the pen very carefully. "How many cattle are missing?" "Haven't counted yet. Came to get you first." "Why me?" "Because you see patterns I don't, and because of someone's testing us. I want a witness who knows how to document evidence." She was on her feet before he finished speaking, reaching for the coat she'd borrowed from Mrs. Fletcher. It was still too thin for Montana, but it was better than the threadbare thing she'd arrived in. They rode out together, Adeline sitting behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. Caleb felt the tension in her grip. Not fear exactly, but readiness. Like she was preparing for something she knew was coming. When they reached the fence line, Adeline dismounted and walked the perimeter slowly, studying the cut wire, the trampled snow, the tracks leading north toward Crowley's land. "3 horses," she said, crouching down. "Came from that direction, cut the fence, drove cattle through, then circled back. Professional work." "How do you know 3 horses?" "Different hoof prints. See here? This one's got a chip in the left rear shoe. This one's stride is wider, bigger animal. And this one—" She stood up, following the tracks with her eyes. "This one hung back, watching maybe, or waiting." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "Where'd you learn to track?" "I didn't. I learned to observe. Same skill, different application." She walked back to him. "How many cattle were in this pasture?" 42 head. "Count them." It took 20 minutes to round up the scattered cattle and get an accurate count. 38 remained. 4 missing, Caleb said grimly. Not enough to raise hell about, but enough to hurt. It's not about the numbers, Adeline replied. It's about the pattern. They're testing your response time, seeing how long it takes you to notice, how you react, whether you report it. Should I report it? To who? The sheriff who didn't investigate your brother's death? The town council that includes Crowley's business partners? She shook her head. They want you to report it. Gives them a chance to dismiss you as paranoid or incompetent. Caleb's hands clenched on the reins. So we do nothing? No. We document everything. Take notes. Record the count. Photograph the fence if we can. Met his eyes. Trust me, I've seen this 100 times. It's a trap. And in the meantime, they keep stealing. In the meantime, they think they're winning. Adeline met his eyes. Trust me, I've seen this before. The men who ran the trafficking operation in New Orleans, they operated the same way. Small moves first, testing resistance, building confidence. They make mistakes when they think no one's watching. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to ride straight to Crowley's ranch and demand answers. But the steady logic in Adeline's voice stopped him. All right, he said finally. We do it your way. But if they come for more cattle, if they come for more, we'll be ready. They rode back in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people thinking the same thoughts, planning the same strategy. That night, Adeline worked on the books until well past midnight. Caleb found her asleep at the desk, head pillowed on her arms, still wearing the same dress she'd worn all day. He stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. 3 days married to a woman he barely knew, and already she was digging into his problems like they were her own. Partnership, he thought. That's what this was supposed to be. But looking at her now, exhausted from work she didn't have to do, defending a ranch that wasn't really hers, it felt like something more. Something neither of them had names for yet. He draped a blanket over her shoulders and left her sleeping. By the end of the first week, the town knew something was happening at the Mercer Ranch. Caleb made his weekly supply run to Dry Creek with Adeline beside him on the wagon. They walked into Morrison's general store together, and the conversation died like someone had snuffed a candle. Mrs. Morrison stood behind the counter, her face carefully neutral. Mr. Mercer.
And this must be the housekeeper we've been hearing about.
Mrs. Mercer, Caleb corrected quietly. We were married last week. Quiet ceremony. The silence deepened. Someone in the back of the store coughed. Mrs. Morrison's eyebrows rose. I see. Well, congratulations, I suppose. Thank you, Adeline said evenly. We're here for supplies, standard monthly order plus extra feed. We're expecting a hard finish to winter. She pulled out a list, neatly written, precisely calculated. Mrs. Morrison took it with obvious reluctance. This is quite a bit more than your usual order, Mr. Mercer. Ranch is expanding, Caleb lied smoothly. Expanding? I heard you lost cattle in the die-off. Recovered faster than expected. He kept his voice casual. That a problem? No problem at all. Just surprising, given... Mrs. Morrison trailed off. Given what? Adeline asked, her tone mild but edged. Given the circumstances. Your brother's death, the winter losses, now a sudden marriage.
People talk, Mr. Mercer.
Let them talk, Caleb said, long as they fill the order. Ms. Morrison's mouth thinned, but she nodded. It'll be ready by end of day. They left the store and walked down Main Street toward the land office. Caleb needed to file updated ownership papers with Adeline's name added to the deed. Protection, she'd called it. If something happened to him, she needed legal standing. Halfway there, a voice called out. Mercer! Caleb turned. Silas Crowley stood on the steps of the saloon, thumbs hooked in his belt, smile sharp as broken glass. "Heard you got yourself a wife," Crowley said, walking over. "Fast work." "Didn't realize I needed your approval." "Don't need approval, just curious." Crowley's eyes shifted to Adeline, looking her up and down in a way that made Caleb's jaw clench. "You're the cousin, aren't you? The one who was supposed to marry him?"
I'm Mrs. Mercer, Adeline said simply.
"Right, Mrs. Mercer. Funny how that worked out, you taking your cousin's place like that. Almost convenient. Almost like I honored a commitment," Adeline replied, her voice steady as stone. Crowley's smile widened. "I like her. Got spine. You're going to need that, married to a man who can't seem to hold on to his cattle." Caleb stepped forward. "You got something to say. Say it plain." "Just making conversation. Heard you lost a few head last week. Fence trouble, I gather. Happens to the best of us." Crowley shrugged, all false sympathy. "Course, if you're having trouble managing the ranch, I'm always willing to make a fair offer. Ranch isn't for sale." "Not yet." Crowley tipped his hat to Adeline. "Ma'am, welcome to Dry Creek. Hope you last longer than the last Mrs. Mercer would have." He walked away before Caleb could respond, boots echoing on the wooden sidewalk. "That was a threat," Adeline said quietly. "That was Crowley being Crowley." "No, that was a man who knows exactly what he's doing. He wanted us to know he knew about the fence. Wanted us to know he's not afraid of consequences." She turned to Caleb. "He's escalating." "Then so do we." They filed the paperwork at the land office, adding Adeline's name to the deed despite the clerk's obvious disapproval. Then they stopped at the telegraph office. "Who are you contacting?" Caleb asked, as Adeline wrote out a message. "A friend in New Orleans. Someone who worked on the trafficking investigation with me. If Crowley's connected to Dufresne's operation, there might be records. Financial transfers, shipping manifests, something that links them." "That's a long shot." "Long shots are all I have right now." The telegraph operator took the message with barely concealed curiosity. Adeline paid in cash and walked out without acknowledging his stare. On the ride home, she finally spoke. "They're going to make this difficult." "The town?" "Everyone. Mrs. Morrison, Crowley, probably half the county before this is done. They don't trust me. They think I'm taking advantage of you or hiding something." "Are you?" Caleb asked, then immediately regretted it. Adeline's laugh was bitter. "I'm hiding plenty, but not from you. Not anymore." "What does that mean?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the landscape roll past. Finally, she said, "It means I'm tired of running from ghosts. My fiancé died because I made choices that put him in danger. I thought coming here would let me start over, become someone new. But you can't outrun your own mistakes. You didn't kill him. I might as well have. If I'd stayed quiet, kept my head down, he'd still be alive. And those women would still be getting sold like livestock." Adeline's hands tightened in her lap. "You can't know that. I know that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we want to pay. Doesn't make it wrong." Caleb glanced at her. "Your fiancé, what was his name?" "Laurent. Laurent Beaumont." "Laurent made his own choice. He could have walked away, let you face it alone. He didn't. That's on him, not you." "You sound very certain." "I am certain. Thomas made the choice too. He could have ignored the theft, kept quiet, stayed safe. But he didn't, because that wasn't who he was. I don't blame myself for his death. I blame the men who killed him." Adeline turned to look at him fully. "You're angrier than you let on." "I'm furious. I'm just not stupid." "What's the difference?" "Stupid gets you killed. Angry keeps you focused." She smiled, small and sad. "Lara would have liked you." "Yeah?" "He was practical too. Believed in doing things right, even when it was hard. You would have gotten along." They rode in silence after that, but something had shifted. Not comfort exactly, they weren't there yet, but understanding. They were both carrying dead people who'd made choices that couldn't be unmade, and they were both still alive, which meant someone had to answer for it. When they got back to the ranch, Adeline went straight to the books. Caleb watched her work for a moment, then headed to the barn to check the horses. He was brushing down the roan when he heard horses approaching. 3 riders, coming fast. Caleb reached for the rifle by the stall door, but it wasn't Crowley's men. It was Doc Morrison, Sheriff Hayes, and a man Caleb didn't recognize wearing a suit too fine for Dry Creek. "Caleb," Doc called out, dismounting. "Need to talk to you. It's important." Caleb stepped out of the barn, rifle lowered but not set down. "What's this about?" Sheriff Hayes cleared his throat. "This is Mr. Edmund Burke. He's a federal marshal out of Helena. Says he's got some questions about your wife." Caleb's blood went cold. The man in the suit stepped forward, pulling a badge from his coat. "Mr. Mercer, I need to speak with Adeline Rousseau."
Is she here?
Her name is Adeline Mercer now, and yeah, she's here.
What's this about?
I'll explain that to her directly. It's a sensitive matter. Then explain it to both of us. We're married, no secrets. Burke's expression didn't change. Very well. There's a warrant for her arrest in Louisiana. Suspected involvement in arson and the destruction of private property. I'm here to take her into custody for extradition. The world tilted. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. That's a lie. It's federal warrant, Mr. Mercer, signed by a judge in New Orleans 3 weeks ago. Miss Rousseau is wanted for questioning in connection with a fire that destroyed a newspaper office and killed the editor inside. She didn't kill anyone. That'll be for a court to decide. Now, is she here or not? Caleb's mind raced. This was it. The long reach Adeline had feared. Dufresne had connections, and he'd used them. Federal warrant meant federal authority.
Come with you, Burke said.
No, you'll come with you, Burke said. No, you'll wait here. Mr. Mercer, you want her cooperation, you wait. She's not a criminal. She's my wife. And I'll bring her out here to talk to you like civilized people, or you can try to force your way past me and see how that works out. Burke studied him carefully, then nodded. 5 minutes. Caleb walked to the house, legs steady even though his heart was hammering. He found Adeline still at the desk, bent over the ledgers. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. She looked up, and whatever she saw in his face made her go very still. "What kind of problem?" "Federal marshal. Says there's a warrant for your arrest. Arson. Murder of the newspaper editor." All color drained from Adeline's face. "They're framing me." "I know." "Caleb, if they take me back to Louisiana, I'll never make it to trial.
Dufresne will have me killed in transit. He's done it before."
"They're not taking you anywhere." "You can't fight a federal warrant." "Watch me." Caleb crossed to her, gripped her shoulders. "Listen to me. We have options. Not good ones, but options. You can run. I'll buy you time. Give you a horse, supplies. Or you can stay and fight, but that means trusting the system that's already failed you once." Adeline's eyes searched his face. "There's a third option." "What?" "I go with him, cooperate fully, and I use the trial to expose everything. Force it into public record where Dufresne can't bury it." "That's suicide." "Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to stop running." Her hands came up to cover his. "I'm tired, Caleb. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of hiding. If I run now, I run forever. And I meant what I said before. I'm done running. You'll die. Then I die fighting instead of hiding. That's worth something. Caleb wanted to shake her, wanted to put her on a horse and send her north to Canada, where federal warrants meant nothing. But he saw the set of her jaw, the determination in her eyes. She'd already made her choice. "All right," he said roughly, "but I'm coming with you. Every step. They want to take you, they take us both. You don't have to. Partnership. That's what we agreed. Partnership means I don't leave you to face this alone." Adeline's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Thank you." They walked out together, hand in hand. Burke waited on the porch, Sheriff Hayes behind him, looking uncomfortable. Doc Morrison had stayed by the horses, face troubled. "Mrs. Mercer," Burke said formally, "I have a warrant for your arrest. You have the right to—" "I know my rights," Adeline interrupted, "and I'll cooperate fully. But I want it noted that I'm doing so voluntarily, and that I maintain my innocence. I did not set that fire. I did not kill anyone, and I'll prove it in court." Burke's expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or respect. "Noted. Sheriff Hayes will escort you to Helena, where you'll await transport to Louisiana." "When?" Caleb demanded. "We leave tomorrow morning." "Not without me. I'm going too." "Mr. Mercer, that's not— I'm her husband. I'm also a witness to her character and whereabouts. If she's going to Louisiana, so am I. You want to arrest me for that? Go ahead." Burke sighed. "Fine, you can travel with us. But any interference with federal custody, and I'll charge you with obstruction." "Understood." Sheriff Hayes stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm sorry. Protocol requires—" "I understand," Adeline said quietly, holding out her wrists. The click of metal was the loudest sound Caleb had ever heard. As Hayes led Adeline toward the horses, Doc Morrison caught Caleb's arm. "This is wrong," Doc said quietly. "Everyone in town knows it." "Then why isn't anyone stopping it?" "Because it's federal, Caleb. We can't—" "You mean you won't?" Caleb jerked his arm free. "She's innocent, and you're all letting them take her anyway." He mounted his horse and rode after Adeline, not looking back at the ranch that suddenly felt like a prison he was leaving behind. They made camp that night halfway to Helena. Burke insisted on keeping Adeline's hands bound, but he at least allowed Caleb to sit with her by the fire. "I found something in the books," Adeline whispered when the marshal was out of earshot. "Before they came. A pattern in the supply thefts. They're not random. They're timed to match shipments from a company called Western Freight and Supply." "What's that mean?" "It means someone's replacing your legitimate orders with cheaper goods and pocketing the difference. Same method Dufresne used in New Orleans. And Western Freight, it's registered to an address in Helena. Same address as Crowley's business office." Caleb felt his chest tighten. "They're connected." "More than connected. I think Crowley is Dufresne's Western partner. I think that's why the warrant came so fast. Dufresne knew I was here because Crowley told him." "Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But if we can get to Helena, access the territorial business records—" "Adeline, you're under arrest. You won't have access to anything." She smiled grimly. "No, but you will." And in that moment, Caleb understood what she was really asking. While she went to trial, he'd be free to investigate, free to gather evidence, free to build the case that might save her life. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll find it, whatever it takes." "Caleb," she leaned closer, voice barely audible. "If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen. If it does, the ranch is yours, The books, the records, everything I found. Use it. Finish what I started. Don't let them win. I'm not letting you die. You might not have a choice. He wanted to argue, wanted to promise he'd fix this, save her, make everything right. Instead, he took her bound hands in his and held them until the fire burned down to embers. And somewhere in the dark Montana night, between the ranch they'd left and the trial that waited ahead, Caleb Mercer made a promise to a woman he barely knew, but couldn't afford to lose. He would find the truth. Or he would burn the whole corrupt system down trying. Helena was bigger than Dry Creek, uglier than Fort Benton, and colder than anywhere Caleb had been in his life. They arrived at the federal courthouse just after dawn. Burke dismounted and pulled Adeline down from her horse with more force than necessary. She stumbled, and Caleb caught her elbow. "Careful," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Burke ignored him. "Inside, Judge Morrison's expecting us." "Morrison?" Adeline's head snapped up. "Related to the general store Morrison's in Dry Creek?" "Brother," Burke said flatly.
Something wrong with that?
Everything was wrong with it. Caleb saw Adeline's jaw tighten, saw her connect the pieces faster than he could. "Conflict of interest," she said. "If the judge is related to people in Dry Creek who have business dealings with Crowley, Judge Morrison is a federal appointee with 20 years on the bench. Your concerns are noted and dismissed. Move." They climbed the courthouse steps into a building that smelled like tobacco and old paper. Burke led them down a long hallway to a wood-paneled office, where a gray-haired man sat behind a massive desk. Judge Morrison looked up, his eyes settling on Adeline with cold appraisal. "This the woman?" "Yes, Your Honor. Adeline Rousseau Mercer, arrested on warrant from Louisiana." "I see she got married since the warrant was issued. Convenient timing." "The marriage is legitimate," Caleb said. "Got the certificate to prove it." "I'm sure you do." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Mercer, you're charged with arson and involuntary manslaughter in the death of newspaper editor Thomas Whitfield. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor, and I request an immediate investigation into the charges. The fire was set to destroy evidence I'd gathered about human trafficking. Save it for trial. Marshal Burke, remand the prisoner to the women's detention facility. She'll await transport to Louisiana there." "Your Honor," Adeline pressed, "I have evidence that connects the trafficking operation to business interests here in Montana Territory. If you'd just allow me to present—" "I'm not interested in your conspiracy theories, Mrs. Mercer. You're facing serious charges in another jurisdiction. That's where you'll make your case." He nodded at Burke. "Take her." Caleb stepped forward. "She gets a lawyer. Federal law says she can request counsel in Louisiana. Until then, she's in protective custody." The judge's eyes hardened. "Mr. Mercer, I'd suggest you return to your ranch and let the law handle this. Your wife made her choices. Now she'll face the consequences." "My wife is being framed by the same men who killed my brother." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. Silas Crowley has been running cattle thefts on my land for months. My brother discovered it and was murdered. Now my wife finds the connection between Crowley and a shipping magnate in Louisiana, and suddenly there's a federal warrant? You don't find that convenient?" "What I find, Mr. Mercer, is that you're a grieving man who's latched onto a woman with a troubled past. Go home. Work your ranch. Let this play out." "I'm not leaving her." "Then you can wait in Helena as long as you like. But you won't have access to the prisoner, and you won't interfere with federal custody. Understood?" Caleb wanted to put his fist through the desk. Instead, he nodded once, sharp and angry. Burke pulled Adeline toward the door. She looked back at Caleb, and he saw fear there for the first time since she'd stepped off that riverboat. "Find it," she mouthed silently. Then she was gone. Caleb stood in that office, hands clenched, staring at a judge who looked at him like he was a fool. "Piece of advice, son," Morrison said quietly. "Women like that, they bring nothing but trouble. Cut your losses. Annul the marriage. Start over. She's my wife. She's a criminal. She's innocent. Then prove it." The judge picked up a pen, dismissing him. "But do it legally, or I'll have you arrested for obstruction." Caleb walked out before he did something stupid. He found a boarding house 2 blocks from the courthouse and paid for a week in advance. The landlady looked at him with pity. "Here for the trial?" "Here to clear my wife's name." "Good luck with that, honey."
Federal charges don't get dropped easy. He spent the first day trying to see Adeline. The detention facility refused him entry. No visitors until after arraignment, they said. Rules were rules. The second day, he went to the Territorial Records Office and asked to see business registrations for Western Freight and Supply. The clerk was a thin man with ink-stained fingers who looked at Caleb like he was asking for the moon. "Those records aren't public." "They're business registrations. That makes them public record." "Not without proper authorization. You got a court order?" "I've got a right to information." "You've got a right to leave before I call the marshal." The clerk turned away. "Next." Caleb walked out, jaw tight, mind racing. He needed a different approach. That night, he sat in a saloon, nursing whiskey he didn't want, and listening to conversations he pretended not to hear.
Helena was a territorial capital, full of politicians, lawyers, businessmen making deals that shaped the whole western region. And among those businessmen, Silas Crowley's name came up more than once. "Heard Crowley's got a new contract with the railroad," someone said at the bar. "Shipping beef clear to Chicago." "Smart man. Knows how to work the system." "Knows how to work people, you mean?" "My cousin supplies feed to his operation. Says Crowley's got connections all the way to Washington." Caleb's ears pricked up. He shifted slightly, listening harder. "What kind of connections?" "The kind that get federal judges appointed. The kind that make warrants appear when you need them." Someone laughed. "You saying Judge Morrison's in Crowley's pocket?" "I'm saying Morrison's brother runs a store in Dry Creek that does half its business with Crowley's ranch. And I'm saying money talks louder than justice in this territory." Caleb's hands tightened on his glass. He'd suspected the connection, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run cold. He finished his drink and left, walking the dark streets until he found himself outside the detention facility. Lights burned in the windows. Somewhere inside, Adeline was alone, probably scared, definitely in danger. "I'll get you out," he said quietly to the building. "I swear to God, I'll find a way." The third day brought a break. Caleb was eating breakfast at the boarding house when a young man approached his table. Clean-shaven, nervous hands, eyes that kept darting to the door. "You Caleb Mercer?" Caleb's hand moved toward his gun. "Who's asking?" "Name's Daniel Cho. I work at the records office." "The clerk who refused you the other day?" "That was my supervisor." He sat down without invitation. "I heard what you were looking for. Western Freight and Supply. What about it?" "I can get you the records, but not through official channels." Caleb studied him carefully.
Why would you do that?
"Because my sister was one of the women they trafficked. 3 years ago, she signed a contract for domestic work in San Francisco. Never made it there. We found her 2 years later in a brothel in Sacramento. She'd been sold." Daniel's voice shook. "She killed herself 6 months after we brought her home." Caleb's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "I've been watching these operations for years, tracking patterns, trying to build evidence.
But every time I get close, people get transferred, records disappear, witnesses vanish. When I heard your wife was arrested for exposing them in Louisiana, I knew. I knew she was telling the truth.
Can you help her?
I can help you help her. But you need to understand the risk. If they find out I gave you access to sealed records, I'll lose my job. Probably get arrested.
Why take that chance?
Daniel met his eyes. Because my sister's dead, and the men who killed her are still operating. Your wife tried to stop them.
That makes her braver than anyone in this whole damn territory, including me.
Caleb felt something shift in his chest. What do you need me to do? Meet me at the records office tonight. Midnight. Back entrance. I'll have the files ready. How do I know this isn't a trap? You don't. But what choice do you have? Daniel left before Caleb could answer. He spent the rest of the day preparing for the possibility of arrest. Wrote a letter to Doc Morrison back in Dry Creek, outlining everything Adeline had discovered. Paid the boarding house landlady an extra week in advance, and told her if he didn't come back, send the letter. Then he waited. Midnight came cold and dark. Caleb approached the records office from the alley, hand on his gun, every nerve alert. Daniel was there, holding a lantern and a thick folder. You came. I said I would. Most men wouldn't risk it. Most men didn't marry a woman brave enough to face a rigged trial rather than run.
Caleb took the folder. What am I looking at? Everything. Western Freight and Supply is registered to a shell company called Continental Holdings. Continental Holdings is owned by another company called Pacific Trade Associates. And Pacific Trade Associates, Daniel's voice dropped, is partially owned by Judge Morrison. Caleb's world tilted. The judge is part of it? Not directly. His name's buried under 3 layers of corporate ownership. But yes, he profits from the same operation your wife tried to expose. That's why the warrant came so fast. That's why everything happened so fast. Your wife connected Crowley to the trafficking network. Crowley panicked and reached out to his partners. They manufactured evidence, got a federal warrant, and now they're trying to silence her permanently before she can testify. Caleb flipped through the documents, seeing names and numbers that confirmed everything Adeline had suspected. This proves she's innocent. This proves there's a conspiracy. But taking down a federal judge? That requires more than paper. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out another envelope. This is the second part. Shipping manifests from Pacific Trade Associates. They show regular cargo transfers between New Orleans and Montana Territory. Cargo listed as domestic workers being shipped like freight. Jesus Christ! It's worse. Some of the manifests show destinations in Canada. They're moving women across international borders now. Your wife stumbled onto something bigger than Louisiana. This is a network that spans from the Gulf Coast to the Canadian frontier. Caleb felt sick. How do we stop it? We don't. Not us alone. This needs to go to someone with real authority. Someone who can't be bought. Daniel hesitated. There's a U.S. attorney in Denver. Name's Catherine Walsh. She's been investigating corruption in the territories for 2 years. She's honest. She's fearless. And she's made enemies of every crooked politician between here and California. How do I reach her? Telegraph. But you can't send it from Helena. They'll intercept it. You need to get to Fort Shaw. Send it from there. Then get back before they transfer your wife to Louisiana. When's the transfer? 5 days from now. Maybe 6 if the weather holds. 5 days to reach Fort Shaw, send evidence to Denver, and get back to Helena. It was barely possible. I need to see my wife first, Caleb said. I can get you in, but only for 10 minutes, and only if you go right now. Guard change happens at 1 in the morning. New guard's my cousin. He owes me a favor. Caleb didn't hesitate.
Let's go. They moved through back alleys to the detention facility. Daniel's cousin, a young man who looked terrified to be breaking protocol, let them through a side door.
10 minutes, he whispered. She's in cell 4. I'll watch the hall. Caleb walked down a narrow corridor lined with locked doors. Cell 4 had a small, barred window. He looked through and saw Adeline sitting on a thin cot, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. "Adeline," he said quietly. Her head snapped up. She was on her feet in seconds, hands gripping the bars. "Caleb? How did you—" "Doesn't matter. Listen to me. I found it. Everything you suspected about Crowley and the judge. It's all true, and I've got proof." Hope flared in her eyes. "You can stop the transfer?" "I'm going to try, but I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "If things go wrong, if I don't make it back in time, you stall. You file motions, you demand new counsel, you claim illness, whatever it takes. You do not get on that transport to Louisiana. You understand?" "Caleb, what are you planning?" "I'm riding to Fort Shaw tonight, sending evidence to a U.S. attorney in Denver who can actually do something about this. Then I'm coming back for you." "Fort Shaw is 2 days' hard ride. You'll never make it there and back before the transfer." "Then I'll ride faster." "Caleb, I'm not losing you." His voice came out rougher than he meant. "You hear me? I'm not letting them take you back to Louisiana to be killed in some staged accident. We're partners. That means I fight for you the same way you fought for me." Adeline's eyes filled. "I was wrong about you." "Wrong how?" "I thought you needed a wife for appearances, for stability. But you're not that simple, are you? You actually care." "Of course I care. You're brilliant and brave, and you stepped into hell to save people who couldn't save themselves. Why wouldn't I care?" "Because most men wouldn't. Most men would have put me on that riverboat the minute they learned the truth. But you stayed. You married me anyway. You're risking everything for someone you barely know." "I know enough." Caleb reached through the bars and took her hand. "I know you're the kind of person who makes the world better just by refusing to look away from what's wrong with it. And I know I'd rather die trying to save you than live knowing I let you face this alone." Adeline's fingers tightened on his. "When you come back—" "When I come back, we're going home. Together. And we're going to finish what you started." "Promise me something." "Anything." "If you don't make it back in time, don't blame yourself. I made my choices. I knew the risks. Whatever happens, you gave me something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" "Hope." She smiled through tears. "I haven't had that in a very long time." Caleb heard footsteps in the hall. Daniel's cousin, signaling time was up. "I have to go," he said, "but I'm coming back. You hold on, you hear me? Don't give up." "I won't. Just be careful. These men killed Laurent, killed your brother. They won't hesitate to kill you too." "Let them try." He kissed her hand once, quick and fierce, then released it and walked away before he could change his mind about leaving. Outside, Daniel was waiting with a packed saddlebag. Food, water, spare ammunition. Map showing the fastest route to Fort Shaw. "My cousin says there's a shortcut through Elk Ridge Pass, but it's dangerous this time of year." "How dangerous?" "Avalanche territory. Narrow trails. You go off the path, you're dead." "Faster than the main road?" "Cuts a day off the journey." Caleb took the bag. "Then that's the route I'm taking." "You're insane." "Probably, but I've got no other choice." He gripped Daniel's shoulder. "Thank you. For everything. Just make sure it counts. My sister didn't die for nothing.
Your wife's fight didn't risk everything for nothing. Make it mean something." "I will." Caleb rode out of Helena before the sun rose, pushing his horse hard toward the mountains.
The documents Daniel had given him were wrapped in oilcloth inside his coat, pressed against his chest like armor. 2 days there, half a day to send the telegraph and get confirmation. 2 days back. 4.5 days total. He had 5 before they moved Adeline. The math was tight, but possible, if nothing went wrong. By noon the first day, everything went wrong. The shortcut through Elk Ridge Pass was worse than Daniel had warned. The trail was barely wide enough for a horse, ice-covered and treacherous. Twice, Caleb's mount slipped and nearly went over the edge. The wind cut through his coat like knives, but he pushed on. Halfway through the pass, he heard it, a low rumble like distant thunder. He looked up and saw the snowpack shifting on the ridge above. "Come on," he urged his horse, digging in his heels. The avalanche came down like the wrath of God. Caleb spurred his horse forward, racing the cascade of snow and rock. The world turned white, sound deafening, air thick with powder. He felt the horse stumble, felt himself flying, felt impact. Then, nothing. He woke to cold so deep it felt like fire. His horse was gone. His hat was gone. Blood ran down the side of his face from a gash above his eyebrow. But the documents were still there, pressed against his chest. He forced himself to stand, legs shaking, head spinning. The pass behind him was buried. The pass ahead was barely passable. He had no horse, no supplies, and night was coming. But Fort Shaw was still out there, maybe 20 miles ahead. So he started walking. And somewhere in the frozen mountains, between Helena and Salvation, Caleb Mercer made a discovery about himself. He wasn't the man who'd waited on that dock 3 weeks ago, practical, guarded, afraid to hope. He was the man who'd marry a stranger to keep a promise. The man who'd cross an avalanche pass on foot to save the woman who'd become more than a wife. The man who'd found partnership and discovered it had turned into something else entirely. Something worth dying for. He walked through the night, frost burning his lungs, blood freezing on his face. And when dawn broke over Fort Shaw, he was still standing. Barely, but standing nonetheless. The telegraph operator at Fort Shaw took one look at Caleb and reached for a bottle of whiskey. "You need a doctor more than you need a telegraph," the man said, pouring 2 glasses. Caleb's hands shook as he took the glass. "Telegraph first, doctor after." "You're bleeding on my floor." "I'll pay to clean it." Caleb downed the whiskey, felt it burn all the way down. "I need to send an urgent message to U.S. Attorney Catherine Walsh in Denver. Federal priority. And I need confirmation of receipt." The operator studied him. "Federal priority requires authorization." "It's regarding a federal case. Human trafficking, judicial corruption, murder. My wife's in custody in Helena, facing false charges. If I don't get this message through, she dies." Something in Caleb's voice must have convinced him. The operator set down his glass and pulled out paper. "What's the message?" Caleb pulled the documents from inside his coat, laid them on the counter. "I need you to summarize these and send them along with this message. Evidence of trafficking network operating from New Orleans to Montana Territory. Federal Judge Morrison compromised. Immediate investigation required. Lives at stake. Will testify in person." The operator's eyebrows rose as he scanned the documents. These are sealed business records. Where'd you get these?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if you stole them. I can't send stolen evidence." "They were provided by a territorial employee who wants justice for his dead sister. The men named in those documents sold her into slavery. Is that legal enough for you?" The operator was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. "Give me an hour. I'll send everything. But if this blows back on me, it won't. I'll take full responsibility." Caleb sat on a chair that smelled like old tobacco and waited while the operator worked. His head throbbed. His ribs ached where he'd hit the ground during the avalanche. But he was alive, and the evidence was moving. An hour later, the operator looked up. "Sent. Now we wait for confirmation." "How long?" "Denver's a busy office. Could be an hour, could be 6. "I don't have 6 hours." "Then you better pray whoever's on duty there is paying attention." Caleb stood, swayed, caught himself on the counter. The operator was right. He needed a doctor. But more than that, he needed to get back on the road to Helena. "There a stable in town?" he asked. 2 blocks east. But friend, you're in no shape to ride." "I'll manage." "You'll die. Look at yourself." "You've got frostbite on 3 fingers, a head wound that needs stitches, and you're favoring your left side like you've got broken ribs. You need rest. What I need is a horse." The operator sighed. "You're going to kill yourself for this woman?" "If that's what it takes." "Must be some woman." Caleb thought about Adeline sitting in that cell, holding on to hope because he'd promised to come back. She is. He made it to the stable before his legs gave out. The stable master found him collapsed against a post and helped him to a cot in the back office. "You're the fellow who came through looking half dead," the stable master said, pressing a cloth to Caleb's head wound. "Word travels fast in a small fort." "I need a horse, your fastest." "You need a week in bed and a doctor, in that order." "I need to get back to Helena before they transfer my wife to Louisiana. That gives me 3 days, maybe 4 if I'm lucky." "Helena's 2 days hard ride from here on a good horse with a healthy rider. You're neither of those things." The stable master tied off the bandage. "But I've got a roan gelding that'll get you there if you don't fall off halfway. Cost you $50. That's twice what he's worth. And it's half what you'd pay for a horse that could save your wife's life. Take it or leave it." Caleb pulled out his money. "I'll take it." He was saddling the horse when a boy ran up from the telegraph office. "Mr. Mercer, message came through." Caleb's heart hammered. "From Denver?" "Yes, sir. U.S. Attorney Walsh received your message and documents. She's sending federal marshals to Helena immediately. Says to tell you to hold tight. Don't do anything stupid, and she'll handle Judge Morrison personally." Relief flooded through Caleb so fast, he had to grip the saddle to stay upright. "How long until the marshals arrive?" "Message doesn't say, but she marked it urgent priority." It wasn't enough. Marshals could take days to mobilize, days to travel, and Adeline had maybe 4 days before the transfer. "Tell the operator thank you," Caleb said, mounting the horse despite the pain screaming through his ribs. "And tell him, if anyone asks, I was never here." He rode out of Fort Shaw as fast as the gelding could manage, every step jarring his injuries, every breath like knives. But he was moving, and moving meant getting back to Adeline before everything fell apart. The first day back was torture. Caleb pushed through the pain, stopping only when the horse needed rest. He avoided the Elk Ridge Pass, too dangerous, too slow, and took the longer route through the valley. Night fell, and he kept riding. By dawn of the second day, his vision started blurring. The frostbite on his fingers had turned an ugly purple. The head wound had reopened, blood soaking through the bandage. He was 10 miles from Helena when he heard horses behind him. Caleb turned in the saddle and saw 3 riders coming fast, too fast to be casual travelers. He urged his horse forward, but the gelding was exhausted from 2 days of hard riding. The riders gained ground. When they got close enough, Caleb recognized the lead horse, Silas Crowley. "Mercer!" Crowley called out. "Hold up!" Caleb reached for his gun, but his frozen fingers couldn't grip it properly. He fumbled, cursed, tried again. Crowley and his men surrounded him, cutting off escape. "Easy now," Crowley said, hands visible and empty. "I'm not here to fight." "Could have fooled me." "I'm here to make you an offer. One that benefits both of us." Caleb kept his hand near his gun. "I'm listening." "I know you sent evidence to Denver. I know Catherine Walsh is coming. And I know you're racing back to Helena before they move your wife." Crowley leaned forward in his saddle. "Here's what you don't know. The transfer's been moved up. They're loading her on a wagon tomorrow morning. First light." Caleb's stomach dropped. "You're lying." "I'm really not. Judge Morrison got nervous when he heard about your trip to Fort Shaw. Figured you were up to something, so he accelerated the timeline. Your wife leaves tomorrow, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm not a monster, Mercer. I'm a businessman, and this whole situation has gotten way out of hand." Crowley's jaw tightened. "I run cattle. I make deals. I cut corners where I can. But trafficking women? Killing men who ask questions? That's not my game. You killed my brother. My men killed your brother in a fight that went bad. That's different from murder. And now I've got federal attention coming down on me because Judge Morrison couldn't keep his operation quiet. So here's the deal. You want your wife back? I'll help you get her out of Helena before that transfer." Caleb's mind raced.
Why would you do that?
Because if Catherine Walsh starts digging, she's going to find things I'd rather stay buried. Not trafficking. I was never part of that. But other business, other deals. Things that don't need federal eyes. Crowley's voice dropped. "You help me stay out of this mess. I help you save your wife. Then we both walk away clean." "I don't trust you." "You don't have to trust me. You just have to recognize that we've got aligned interests right now. I want Walsh focusing on Morrison and the trafficking network, not on every business transaction in Montana territory. You want your wife free. We can both get what we want." Caleb studied Crowley's face, looking for the lie. "What's your plan?" "Morrison's got your wife in the Helena detention facility, but the wagon won't leave from there. Too public, too many witnesses. They're moving her to a staging house tonight. Old warehouse near the river. Private transfer, no records. That's where we hit them."
We?
"You think you can take on Morrison's men alone in your condition? You can barely stay on that horse," Crowley gestured to his companions. "I've got 5 men ready to move. We go in tonight, get your wife out, put her on a fast horse to Canada. By the time Morrison realizes she's gone, she'll be across the border. And what do you get out of this? A clean reputation when Walsh arrives. I'll testify that Morrison pressured me into cooperation, that he threatened my business if I didn't play along. I'll give her everything she needs to take him down and make myself look like a victim instead of a participant." It was smart. Ruthless, but smart. Caleb's every instinct screamed not to trust Silas Crowley. But his every instinct also knew Adeline was running out of time. "If you're lying," Caleb said slowly, "if this is a trap, then you'll kill me. I get it. But Mercer, think about it. If I wanted you dead, I could have shot you 5 minutes ago while you were fumbling with that gun. I'm offering you a way out. Take it or don't, but decide fast. We've got maybe 6 hours before they move her." Caleb made a choice he'd probably regret. "All right, but I lead the rescue. Your men follow my orders." "Done." Crowley extended his hand. Caleb didn't take it. "Let's go get my wife." They rode into Helena as the sun set. 6 men on a mission that could either save Adeline or get them all killed. Crowley led them to a rundown building near the river docks. "That's the staging house. Morrison uses it for transfers he doesn't want documented. There'll be guards, probably 3 or 4, and your wife will be inside, likely restrained." "How do you know all this?" "I told you. Morrison pressured me into cooperation. I've seen this operation before. Not with your wife,
but with others. Crowley's voice went flat.
Women who disappeared and never made it to their destinations.
Caleb felt sick. How many? Does it matter? Too many, and every one of them is blood on Morrison's hands. Crowley turned to his men. Circle around back. Wait for my signal. When we move fast. Get the woman, get out. No killing unless necessary. No killing at all, Caleb said firmly. We do this clean. These men won't hesitate to kill you. Then we'll have to be faster than they are. They split up, Crowley's men taking position around the building while Caleb and Crowley approached the front. The warehouse was dark, except for a single lamp burning in a ground floor window. 2 guards outside, Crowley whispered. 2 inside, probably, plus whoever's supervising the transfer. That's 5 against 6. I like those odds. You're counting yourself in those 6? Mercer, you can barely stand. I'll manage. Crowley shook his head, but didn't argue. He signaled his men, then stepped out of the shadows and called to the guards. Evening, boys. Morrison send you? The guards turned, hands moving to weapons. Who's asking? Silas Crowley. I've got a delivery for the judge. We weren't told about any delivery. That's because the judge doesn't tell you everything. Now open the door before I get annoyed. The guards exchanged glances. One of them walked to the door and knocked. 3 short raps, 2 long. A voice from inside. Who's there? Crowley says he's got a delivery. The door opened a crack. That's when Caleb moved. He hit the first guard low and hard, driving him into the second guard. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Crowley was through the door before they could recover, gun drawn, shouting, "Nobody move!" Inside, Caleb saw 3 men surrounding a woman bound to a chair. Adeline. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. Caleb? I'm getting you out of here. One of Morrison's men reached for his gun. Crowley fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the wall 6 inches from the man's head. Next one won't miss, Crowley said calmly. Now back away from the woman. The men backed away, hands raised. Caleb crossed to Adeline and cut her bonds with shaking hands. Can you walk? I can run if I have to. She grabbed his arm as she stood. How did you... Crowley? What's he doing here? Helping. It's complicated. I'll explain later. Outside, shouts erupted. More guards arriving, or maybe Morrison's men had gotten word of the rescue. We need to move, Crowley said. Now. They ran for the back exit, Adeline between Caleb and Crowley. Crowley's men were waiting with horses. Get her up, Crowley ordered. Fast route to the Canadian border. Don't stop for anything. Wait, Adeline said. I can't run to Canada. That makes me look guilty. You stay here, you're dead, Caleb argued. I stay here and fight with the evidence you sent to Catherine Walsh. I have a chance at justice. She turned to Crowley. Is Walsh really coming? Federal marshals are probably already on their way, but Morrison will have you killed before they arrive. You need to disappear until it's safe. Adeline looked at Caleb, and he saw the same determination that had made her stay instead of running in the first place. I'm not hiding anymore. If Walsh is coming, I'm staying to testify. Adeline, I mean it, Caleb. I ran from New Orleans. I'm not running from Helena. Not when we're this close to finishing it. Gunfire erupted behind them. Morrison's men had found them. This is touching and all, Crowley snapped. But we need to make a decision. She runs or she fights, but she can't do either standing in this alley. Caleb looked at his wife, this woman who'd stepped off a riverboat 3 weeks ago and turned his entire world inside out. Your choice. I stay. We both stay. And we finish this together. More gunfire. Closer this time. Crowley cursed. Fine.
But we're not making our stand here. My ranch is 10 miles out. Defensible position, supplies, and enough men to hold off Morrison's people until Walsh arrives. We go there, we dig in, and we pray the federal marshals get here before Morrison does. It wasn't a great plan, but it was the only plan they had. They rode through the night, 6 horses moving fast through territory that could hide 100 men. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound could be pursuit. But they made it to Crowley's ranch just before dawn. The main house was built like a fortress, thick walls, high windows, clear sight lines in every direction. Crowley's men took defensive positions while Caleb got Adeline inside. She collapsed into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up. "Tell me everything."
How did you survive the avalanche? How did you get to Fort Shaw? How did you end up working with Silas Crowley? Caleb told her, leaving nothing out. The documents, the telegraph to Walsh, the ride back, Crowley's unexpected offer. When he finished, Adeline was quiet for a long time. "You almost died for me," she said finally. "Almost doesn't count." "Caleb, don't. Don't make this more than it is. We're partners. Partners don't abandon each other." "This is more than partnership." He wanted to deny it, wanted to keep things simple and defined. But looking at her now, bruised from days in custody, exhausted from running, still refusing to back down, he couldn't lie. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Before Adeline could respond, Crowley burst into the room. "We've got company. Morrison's men, at least a dozen, riding in from the east." Caleb was on his feet instantly. "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe less. They're coming hard." "Can we hold them?" "Depends on how badly they want to get in, and how long Walsh takes to arrive."
Crowley turned to Adeline. "You can still run. My men will cover you."
"I'm staying," Adeline said, standing up. "Give me a rifle."
Crowley's eyebrows rose. "You know how to shoot?"
"My father was a hunter. I know which end the bullets come out."
Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. They took positions at the windows, rifles loaded, waiting. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when Morrison's men appeared, a line of riders spreading out to surround the ranch. And at the center of that line, sitting tall in his saddle, was Judge Morrison himself. "Caleb Mercer," Morrison's voice carried across the yard. "Send out the woman, and we'll discuss terms." Caleb leaned out the window. "She's not going anywhere." "Then you're all under arrest for obstruction of federal custody. Surrender now, and I'll be lenient."
"Lenient like you were with my brother? Or like you were with the women you trafficked?" Morrison's face darkened.
"Last chance, Mercer. Go to hell."
Morrison raised his hand, and his men opened fire. The battle for Crowley's ranch had begun, and somewhere on the road from the north, federal marshals sent by Catherine Walsh were racing toward Helena. The question was whether they'd arrive in time, or whether the sun would set on a bloodbath that would bury the truth forever. Bullets tore through the windows, splintering wood and shattering glass. Caleb ducked low, pulling Adeline down with him. "How many rounds do we have?" she shouted over the gunfire. "Enough to hold them for maybe an hour," Crowley answered from across the room. "After that, we're counting prayers." An hour wasn't enough. Walsh's marshals could be hours away still. Days, if they'd been delayed. Caleb fired back through the broken window, forcing Morrison's men to scatter. "We need to split their attention. Crowley, you got men who can circle around behind them? In broad daylight? They'll be picked off before they get 50 yards. Then we create a distraction." What kind of distraction? Caleb's mind raced. Morrison wanted Adeline dead and the evidence buried. He'd brought enough men to overwhelm Crowley's ranch through sheer numbers. But he'd also brought himself, arrogant enough to oversee the execution personally.
He wants this finished quietly, Caleb said. No witnesses, no federal attention. But if we make enough noise, if we force this into a public spectacle, he'll back off, Adeline finished, understanding flashing in her eyes. Morrison can't afford a massacre in broad daylight. Too many questions. So we make it loud. Caleb turned to Crowley. You got dynamite? Crowley's expression shifted. For clearing stumps, why? Because we're going to blow the barn. Big enough explosion, people in Helena will hear it.
They'll come looking. Morrison won't risk killing witnesses. That barn cost me $3,000. Your barn or our lives? Choose fast. Crowley cursed, then nodded. Storage shed, back corner. 3 crates. But someone's got to get to it through that field, and Morrison's men have it covered.
I'll go,
Adeline said. No. Caleb's voice was flat. Absolutely not. You can barely stand. Your ribs are broken, and you've got frostbite. I'm faster and lighter. You're also the one they're trying to kill. Which means they won't shoot to kill me out there. They want me alive for questioning, for leverage. You, they'll drop without hesitation. She grabbed his arm. Caleb, we don't have time to argue. I can do this. Everything in him screamed to refuse. But she was right. Morrison needed her alive, at least temporarily. And Caleb was in no shape to run. I hate this, he said. I know. She kissed him then, quick and fierce. Cover me. Before he could respond, she was up and moving toward the back door. Crowley's men opened fire, creating a wall of suppression. Adeline burst through the door and ran low across the field. Morrison's men spotted her immediately. Shouts erupted. Gunfire followed, but the shots went wide, deliberately high, Caleb realized. They were trying to stop her, not kill her. Adeline reached the shed and disappeared inside. Caleb's heart hammered against his broken ribs. Come on, he whispered. Come on! She emerged seconds later, carrying 2 crates, running back toward the house. Morrison's men closed in, trying to cut her off. Suppression fire! Crowley roared. Don't let them take her! The ranch erupted with gunfire. Morrison's men dove for cover as bullets tore up the ground around them. Adeline stumbled, nearly dropped the crates, recovered. 20 yards from the house. 15. 10. A rider broke from Morrison's line, racing toward her on horseback. Caleb recognized him. Burke, the federal marshal who'd arrested Adeline in the first place. Get down! Caleb shouted. Adeline dropped flat as Burke's horse thundered over her. He wheeled around, reaching down to grab her. Caleb fired. The shot hit Burke's arm. He howled, jerked back, lost control of his horse. The animal reared, and Burke fell hard. Adeline scrambled up and ran the last 10 yards. Caleb pulled her through the door, just as more shots peppered the wall behind her. She was breathing hard, eyes bright with adrenaline. Got it. You're insane. I'm effective. There's a difference. She set down the crates. Now how do we use this? Crowley was already pulling out sticks of dynamite, handling them with practiced care. We rigged the barn with enough charges to make it spectacular. Light the fuse, get clear. Let Morrison's men think we're desperate enough to blow ourselves up. Will it work? Adeline asked. It'll work if we sell it right. Crowley looked at Caleb. You up for some acting? What kind of acting? The kind where you make Morrison think you're ready to die before surrendering. Caleb understood. Give me the dynamite. 10 minutes later, Caleb was positioning charges in the barn, while Morrison's men held their fire, uncertain what he was doing. He made sure they could see him working, made sure it looked desperate and reckless. When he returned to the house, Morrison was shouting across the yard. Mercer, whatever you're planning, it won't work. You're surrounded. Caleb leaned out the window. You want my wife? Come take her.
Don't be stupid. You can't win this. Maybe not, but I can make sure everyone in Helena hears what happens here. That explosion you saw me rigging? That's your reputation burning down. Morrison's face went dark. You're bluffing. Try me. I've got nothing left to lose. You killed my brother. You tried to kill my wife. You've been trafficking women for years.
You think I care about surviving this? I care about making sure the whole territory knows what you are. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison knew the truth. A massive explosion would draw attention. Attention meant questions. Questions meant investigations he couldn't control, even with his federal connections. Stand down, Morrison finally called to his men. We wait. Crowley appeared at Caleb's shoulder. That bought us time, but not much. He'll try something else. Then we need Walsh to arrive before he does. As if summoned by the words, a sound carried across the valley. Horses. A lot of them. Everyone froze. Morrison turned toward the sound, hand shading his eyes. Over the ridge came riders carrying federal badges and rifles. U.S. Marshal Catherine Walsh rode at the front. A woman in her 40s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything, and judged most of it wanting. She pulled up between the two groups, surveyed the standoff, and her voice cut through the tension like a blade. Judge Morrison, step away from those men and surrender your weapons. Morrison's face went pale. Marshal Walsh, this is a federal matter. It certainly is. Federal trafficking charges, federal corruption charges, federal murder conspiracy. I've got warrants for you, Marshal Burke, and 6 other men connected to your operation. Walsh gestured to her marshals. Arrest them. Morrison's men looked at each other, then at Morrison, then slowly began laying down their weapons. Morrison himself stayed mounted, defiant. You have no authority. I have a direct order from the Attorney General's office, and I have evidence provided by Caleb Mercer that connects you to a trafficking network operating across 3 territories. You're done, Morrison. The only question is whether you surrender peacefully or I drag you off that horse. For a long moment, Morrison just sat there. Then his hand moved toward his coat. Gun! Someone shouted. Everything happened at once. Morrison drew, Walsh's marshals fired. Morrison jerked in the saddle, blood blooming across his chest. He fell slowly, hitting the ground with a sound that seemed too quiet for the end of so much corruption. Walsh dismounted and checked his pulse. He's alive, barely. Get him medical attention. She turned toward the house. Mrs. Mercer, you can come out. Adeline stepped through the door, Caleb beside her. Walsh studied them both, the exhausted woman and the battered man who'd crossed mountains to save her. You're Caleb Mercer? Walsh asked. Yes, ma'am. You look like hell. I've had a rough week. I imagine so. Walsh pulled out papers from her coat. Based on the evidence you sent, I'm issuing a federal pardon for Mrs. Mercer. The arson charges are dismissed. The Louisiana warrant is void. She's free. Adeline swayed. Caleb caught her, held her steady. What about Morrison? He asked. He'll face trial for trafficking, corruption, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 20 other charges. So will everyone connected to his operation. Walsh's expression softened slightly. Your brother's death will be investigated properly this time, and the women who were trafficked, those we can find, will be compensated and given asylum if needed. What about Crowley? Adeline asked. Walsh looked toward where Silas Crowley stood in his doorway. Mr. Crowley has agreed to testify against Morrison in exchange for immunity on his other activities. Seems he wasn't directly involved in the trafficking, just turned a convenient blind eye and profited from associated businesses. Not admirable,
but not criminal under federal statute. Crowley had the grace to look ashamed. "He helped us," Caleb said. "Without him, we wouldn't have survived long enough for you to arrive." "Noted. Consider yourself lucky, Mr.
Crowley. But if I find you've crossed the line again, immunity won't save you." Crowley nodded silently. Walsh turned back to Caleb and Adeline. "You two need medical attention and rest. There's a doctor with our group. After that, you're free to go home." Home. The word hit Caleb harder than expected. The ranch waiting back in Dry Creek. The life they'd barely started before everything exploded. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. Thank whoever taught you to be stubborn enough to cross an avalanche pass for evidence." Walsh's eyes moved to Adeline. "And whoever taught you to be brave enough to stay and fight instead of running. The world needs more people like you both." The doctor, a tired-looking man with gentle hands, patched Caleb's wounds and treated his frostbite. 3 fingers would probably never work quite right again, he said. The ribs would heal in 6 weeks. The head wound would scar. Caleb didn't care about any of it.
While the doctor worked, Adeline sat beside him, holding his good hand. "We should talk," she said quietly. "About what?" "About what happens now. The marriage was supposed to be practical. Partnership. Mutual benefit."
Caleb's chest tightened.
And somewhere between the frozen dock and this moment, it stopped being practical.
Her voice was steady, but her eyes were uncertain.
"At least for me." "Adeline, you don't have to say anything. I know this wasn't what you signed up for. I know I brought chaos into your life. If you want to go back to how things were supposed to be, just partners, nothing more, I'll understand."
Caleb looked at this woman who'd faced down trafficking rings and federal corruption, who'd refused to run even when running meant survival, who'd kissed him before sprinting through gunfire to save them all. "You're right," he said. "This isn't what I signed up for." Pain flashed across her face.
"I signed up for a quiet partnership with a school teacher," he continued. "Someone practical and easy and uncomplicated. What I got was a woman who's braver than any man I've known, who sees patterns in numbers that could save lives, who stands in a cell facing execution and still chooses hope." He squeezed her hand. "I didn't sign up for falling in love with my wife. But here we are." Adeline's breath caught.
"Love?"
"You think I crossed those mountains for partnership? You think I'd take a bullet for a business arrangement?"
"Caleb."
"I love you. I don't know when it started. Maybe when you admitted you came here to disappear. Maybe when you refused to give up on finding the truth. Maybe the second you stepped off that riverboat, looking like you'd fight the whole world if you had to. But I love you. And if you'll have me, not as a partner, not as a convenient arrangement, but as a husband who actually means the vows, then I'm yours." Tears spilled down Adeline's cheeks.
"I thought I'd lost the ability to hope for anything good. After Laurent died, after everything that happened in New Orleans, I thought I was broken. But then I met a cowboy who waited 3 days in the freezing cold for someone he'd never met, who kept promises even when they nearly killed him, who looked at me like I was worth saving. You didn't need saving. Maybe not. But I needed someone to stand with me. And you did. Even when it was stupid and dangerous and probably impossible." She leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his. "I love you too. God help me. I love you too." Caleb kissed her then, properly this time. Not quick and desperate like before the gunfire. Slow and certain, and full of promises they both meant to keep. When they finally pulled apart, the doctor was smiling. "Congratulations," he said.
though I'd suggest waiting until those ribs heal before too much celebrating. They rode back to Dry Creek 3 days later.
The town turned out to watch them arrive. News had traveled fast about Morrison's arrest, about the trafficking network, about the shootout at Crowley's ranch. Mrs. Morrison stood on her porch, face troubled. "Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, I owe you both an apology." "For what?" Adeline asked. "For doubting you, for listening to gossip instead of truth. You're a brave woman, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Others echoed her sentiment. Doc Morrison, Sheriff Hayes, even some of Crowley's men who'd fought alongside them. The ranch, when they reached it, looked exactly as they'd left it. Empty, cold, waiting. But as Caleb helped Adeline down from the wagon, it felt different somehow. Less like a fortress, more like potential. "Welcome home," he said. "Home," Adeline repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." They spent the next weeks rebuilding, not just the ranch, though that needed work too, but their lives. Adeline took over the books completely, finding patterns and efficiencies that Thomas had never seen. Within a month, the ranch was profitable again. Caleb hired 2 ranch hands, young men looking for honest work and a place to belong. The bunkhouse that had sat empty since Thomas died was suddenly full of life again. The schoolhouse Adeline had suggested became reality. She taught reading and writing to ranch workers, immigrant families, anyone who wanted to learn. Word spread. Students came from neighboring ranches. One evening, 6 months after the shootout, Caleb found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. "Thinking about New Orleans?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Thinking about Laurent, actually. Wondering what he'd think of all this." "I think he'd be proud." "You didn't know him." "I know he loved a woman brave enough to fight corruption. I know he died trying to protect her. That tells me everything about his character." Caleb took her hand. "He'd be proud that you didn't give up, that you finished what you both started." Adeline was quiet for a moment. The federal investigation found 12 women who'd been trafficked through Morrison's network. 12 that survived, anyway. Walsh says there were probably dozens more who didn't. Because of what you exposed, those 12 are free. And the network is broken. That matters. It doesn't bring back the ones we lost. No, but it might save the ones who come after. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her carefully. The ribs had healed, but sometimes still ached. "I got a letter from Daniel Cho," she said. "He's been promoted at the records office, and he's started a fund to help families of trafficking victims. Named it after his sister." "That's good." He also said Catherine Walsh is building cases against 3 other territorial judges with connections to trafficking operations. The evidence we provided started something bigger than either of us realized. Caleb thought about his brother Thomas, who died asking questions that needed asking. About Laurent, who died protecting the woman he loved. About all the people who'd paid prices they shouldn't have had to pay. "Then we make sure their deaths meant something," he said firmly. "We keep fighting. We keep exposing. We make this territory better than what we found." "That sounds exhausting." "Probably will be," he smiled. "But we're partners, right? We can handle it." "Partners," Adeline agreed. Then she smiled. "And more than partners, much more." Winter came again to Montana Territory. But this time the cold didn't feel like loneliness. The ranch thrived. The schoolhouse filled with students. Word spread about the couple who'd taken down a federal judge and broken a trafficking network. Some stories grew in the telling, became legends about the cowboy who crossed mountains and the woman who refused to run. But the truth was simpler and better than any legend. It was partnership that turned into love. It was 2 broken people who'd found each other in the frozen dark and chosen to stand together. It was promises kept and justice earned, and hope that had seemed impossible, becoming reality, one hard-fought day at a time. And on cold Montana nights, when the wind howled across the plains, Caleb Mercer no longer heard loneliness. He heard Adeline's voice teaching students to read. He heard ranch hands laughing in the bunkhouse. He heard the sound of a life built on something more solid than survival. He heard home. Not the home he'd planned for when he stood on that frozen dock 3 days waiting. The home he'd found when a woman with secrets and courage stepped off a riverboat and changed everything. The man who'd waited in the biting cold no longer waited for anything. He stood beside a woman who'd stopped running, not because the danger had vanished, not because the world had suddenly become safe, but because they'd learned that some things were worth the risk of staying. Justice was one of those things. Love was another. And partnership, real partnership, the kind that turned into forever, was worth every scar, every broken rib, every frozen finger that would never work quite right again. Caleb Mercer had waited in that cold for a wife. What he'd found was so much more.